Hey there, my name is Renee Hobbs, and thanks so much for joining us for a Media Education Lab webinar. Today, I am here with one of my oldest, shall I say, oldest and best former graduate students, David Cooper Moore, and also a co-author. We wrote Discovering Media Literacy together back in the day, as we tried to figure out what media literacy looked like in the context of urban public education. Today, David is here to share his experience in working in Philadelphia to address adult learners, and he's got a dynamite program scheduled for us. Like we always do in the Media Education Lab webinars, David's going to talk for about 30 minutes. He has a cool breakout activity for us to engage in, which provides a really great way for us to deepen the conversation and develop relationships with the folks who are coming to this program from all over the country and all over the world. So if you haven't yet put your name and your location in the chat, do so, because we welcome you from wherever you are. Hi, Ariel. Hi, Amanda. Amanda from San Antonio. April from Palm Beach, Florida. David, you should take it away, my friend.
Great. Thanks so much, Renee. My name is David Cooper Moore. I'm a media education consultant here in Philadelphia, where I've been based since I worked with Renee as a graduate student at Temple University, and we did really amazing things here. In the past few years, I've transitioned into doing digital literacy programming with the city of Philadelphia through both their library programs and through the Office of Children and Families. So I'll tell you a little bit about my work. But I want to talk mostly about some of the thinking and practice that I've started putting into place around what is often referred to as the computer basics. And so a lot of times with adult learners, the first question is, where do you start? And the obvious answer is you start at the beginning. But what that looks like is a little bit complicated with adult learners for reasons that we'll talk about today. So the title of the presentation is Rethinking the Basics, Developing Trust, Proximity, and Autonomy with Adult Digital Literacy Learners. Oops, I'm going to try to move my slides here. Where do you start? And the obvious answer is start at the beginning. I can hear myself.
Sorry.
No problem. So I'll give you the overview of today's talk. I'm going to talk a little about the landscape of digital literacy and digital inclusion. I'm going to talk about rethinking the basics approach to digital learning. I'm going to talk about the role of helpers in providing digital learning to adults and the mindset shift that I've gone through in doing this work in Philadelphia around bringing as many people to the table to help as possible. And then finally, we will do a breakout session where we share our values for a help experience and try to think about if we can really identify some of the core values that inform not just what kind of work we're doing, but who we want doing this work with us. And how can we widen that tent as much as possible? You can feel free to annotate my screen if you would like to. I always teach people how to annotate, but if we could maybe hit the trash can there for the rest of the presentation. I don't know who, so somebody has their annotations on, I think. Let me see if I can clear these. There we go. Okay. So first, we're going to talk a little bit about understanding the landscape of digital literacy and digital inclusion. For those of you not familiar with the digital inclusion landscape, this is a phrase that refers to the broadening of access of digital devices and broadband internet, along with the kinds of digital literacy training that I think everybody here is fairly familiar with. And there's been a lot of investment in digital inclusion, especially since the onset of the pandemic. So, oops, one second. There we go. In Philadelphia, over the past few years, the city has developed what they call their digital equity plan. It's a 5-year initiative that is trying to coordinate the many different public computing centers, or PCCs, together. This is kind of the second go at it since they developed the PCC system in 2010, which Renee was with us during the BTOP initiative, it was called in Philadelphia. But there's been a huge amount of interest in developing public computing centers as part of a plan for getting Philadelphians connected to broadband internet. And so the idea here is that the PCCs include digital literacy, but they also include things like device lending, getting people connected in their homes, and what's called digital navigation, which is a specific element that I'm going to talk about in just a second. The idea is expanding digital access throughout high-need neighborhoods and really everywhere in Philadelphia. And the story there has been really interesting and very promising because wireline broadband, in the most recent survey of household internet assessment, went from 70% in 2019 to 84% in 2021. A lot of that was due to some on-the-ground initiatives, both private and public, to get people connected through the school system. There was a huge Chromebook lending operation that got 50,000 Chromebooks out to students in Philadelphia, and an expansion of free and reduced cost internet access at home. Part of the effort was coordinated by digital navigators in Philadelphia. I work with a group called the Technology Learning Collaborative here in Philly, who has a relationship with the National Digital Inclusion Alliance. And the digital navigator's role was specifically created, at least during the pandemic conditions, for supporting with rapid broadband adoption. So the idea was that when people need to get connected, they have to do a lot of things to get an internet connection working in their house. And so a lot of that is very specialized knowledge that requires certain kinds of help procedures that aren't generalist, right? And so the digital navigators were highly specialized in helping with tasks related specifically to internet connectivity and device distribution. There's a 211 network in Philadelphia now that you can call and get connected to digital navigator organizations in Philadelphia to get internet in the home. I also worked with digital resource specialists, which is a special category of library workers at the Free Library of Philadelphia. It's a unique job class that's drawn from existing library assistants who have a mandate in their job description to support the digital needs of patrons coming into the library. This is a really different form of support. Instead of being highly specialized for a particular task that requires a lot of specific expertise in negotiating a lot of different players in the broadband space, these are mostly generalist tasks with a high level of flexibility and local variability. Depending on which library you're working at, the needs of the folks that are coming in can be widely different. And so you kind of need to be ready to do almost anything. I've worked with about 15 different digital resource specialists at the library, and I've seen everything from people coming in to fill out a job application or get access to their email account, to folks that are trying to petition for legal reasons that require a lot of background research and developing partnerships. And finally, I've worked with the Public Computing Center volunteers. These are coordinated through the city, through the Office of Children and Families. It's a network of volunteers that are deployed to rec centers and nonprofits and other folks that host public computing centers. And here, these are usually integrated into the wider programming goals of the specific sites. So if the site focuses on adult basic education, the volunteers are supporting the adult basic education programming, and they are layering in things like digital literacy through the programming they're doing. So now I need to take a quick step back, because one thing I notice in all three of these environments, both the navigator with specialized skills, the navigation of generalist skills, the sort of just-in-time support that somebody like a DRS at the library provides, or the integrated support in different kinds of adult programming, computer class is still really challenging. And it's somewhat understandable that it's challenging, but I ask a lot of questions about it because from what I can tell, a lot of computer classes start with the same kinds of basics, right? There's only a couple of different ways to start on the basic operation of a computer. It's really not until you get into the more advanced skills in a lot of the curriculum that I work with that you really have to start asking a lot of those critical media literacy questions that I really value and bring to my work. And so my question is, what makes this so challenging? And what I sort of came to realize is that the computer class really just sits right in the middle of a huge web of different needs that folks have coming in to their help environments, right? That encompass digital and media literacy. They encompass really basic technical operation of computers. They encompass workforce development, social services, and adult education. And there's computer class right in the middle. A lot of times computer classes seem to be offered kind of separately or sort of in isolation from all of the other social functions that a lot of these different areas require. So for digital and media literacy, a lot of times those basic media literacy principles that we're familiar with, access, analyze, evaluate, create, including medium-specific training on new technologies and being aware of how emerging technologies change our understanding of how to ask these questions, they often kind of get put into this category of an enrichment program. It would be nice, right? It would be nice to be able to do digital and media literacy. Instead, we get a lot of focus on things like technical operation, the ability to operate computers as machines and not navigate the internet as a platform, somewhat neutral from the kind of content you might see on the internet. And I've actually grown a really strong appreciation for how difficult it is to teach technical operation, because in my experiences with technical operation that I've had challenges with in the past, which is driving a car, my driver's ed experience was truly horrendous. And my experiences driving a car are subsequently not fantastic. And the kind of deliberative practice and out of the classroom support that you need in operating a new machine is something that I've grown a lot of appreciation for in the past few years of my work. Then there's workforce development tasks, right? The ability to use technology to find and apply for and develop skills for jobs. Here, goals are really, really clear and urgent, but they often require formal training partnerships because there are only so many basic skills that you can support somebody with in career search before they really do need to actually do the things to get the job. There's a very clear goal and a very clear outline. And so the format here is a bit more of the career counselor. In social services, there are so many different ways that digital technologies meet services that create barriers to service that are no one person's fault, right? There are very difficult forms that need to be filled out. There's difficult websites that don't work very well. There are language barriers that need to be overcome if two people don't speak the same language. And so that requires a lot of one-on-one trust and specific knowledge of services, right? And so this is kind of a community liaison role. And finally, we have adult education, which is the remediation or continuing education for adults who have complex experiences with schools and learning, right? A lot of folks that are experiencing new learning in adult basic education, they maybe didn't have fantastic experiences in school. I have a lot of experiences coming out of my work as an alternative high school media coordinator, that when students have complicated and negative experiences in their previous school life, future learning can't look the same way that it looked before. And so this often relies on things like a scope and sequence for learning, and it's often adapted from K-12 and college learning, but it's going to require additional supports. I call this the adaptive classroom, right? The ability to adapt individually to the person who is seeking support. So all of these things together combine, and we're doing all of them at the same time every time we're offering a computer class. And we don't know where on the map any given person is going to be in terms of their needs until we ask them. For myself, I'm always reflecting on where is my or my organization's biggest strengths and challenges along this map. For me, I'm right here in the middle top. I'm a digital media literacy person. I have some experience with adult education from my work doing work in an alternative high school in Philadelphia. And I'm a little bit of a techie. I've never had any particular problems with technical operation. And so it's sometimes important for me to imagine that folks coming in for support don't necessarily, have the same experiences that I have. Just gonna get back to my slideshow. Where I needed the most support in my work as I started working in Philadelphia is here between workforce development and social services, developing those relationships, knowing where training programs are, knowing how the social services and the websites associated with them work at a basic level. These are the kinds of things that folks like the digital navigators get trained in specifically to help with around, how do you navigate this specific social service? So now I'm thinking, okay, so how do we move from a computer class, right, which is something that sort of reaches a large number of people who need these kinds of supports, to a conception of a network of helpers that can help out in all the areas where we need them in just the right time, in just the right way. And this, of course, got me thinking a little bit about the British taxi system. That's mostly because I always think about the British taxi system because I think it's so interesting. When you have to learn how to drive a cab in England, you have to go on the knowledge, right? And being on the knowledge means studying the incredibly complicated network of streets in London to know exactly how to get from any place to any other place in the most efficient way possible. So if anybody's ever seen the documentary series, the Up series, 7 Up and 14 Up, etc., one of them trains to become a cab driver, and you see him on the knowledge learning every single side street in London because there are so many exceptions and weird rules that their taxi system is still sort of a benefit over trying to just plug it into your GPS. Anybody who's driven in London, just plugging things into your GPS doesn't always work. The reason this is relevant to me is because it can be really difficult for a lot of us who have essentially been on the knowledge our whole lives, right? To understand how much embodied knowledge is required to meaningfully participate in the digital world. We are essentially all using computers and the internet as cab drivers in London know the streets. And we're trying to figure out how to translate our embodied knowledge to folks who maybe have had bad experiences driving the car, right? Maybe they just never really learned and never had an opportunity to learn, or maybe they did learn, but it was 20 years ago and a lot of things have changed. And so developing that embodied knowledge requires a long-term approach to developing relationships with learners that are really adaptable to the different goals that they have to achieve. It's the question of moving from I know how to do this to I can do this. I can prove it to you. I can show you how I do this. And we have to be able to do it in any imaginable digital environment for any imaginable goal. So one thing that I think about a little bit in this work is how when we offer computer classes, one thing that we're doing is we're doing the most the clear and obvious way to create a proxy for a trust relationship between somebody who needs to meet their goal using digital technology and somebody who can help them achieve that goal. And computer classes are great because adult learners in computer classes can express their vulnerability, right? They can say, I don't know how to do this in a way that is not met with shame or with frustration, right? They can gain opportunities for repeat practice to build confidence, not confiance. I missed one typo. They have opportunities to do that practice, right? Without deliberative practice, it's not possible to gain the kind of fluency with digital devices that you need. It gives them the opportunity to develop meaningful relationships with teachers and other helpers and classmates, right? There's a whole network that's created within a computer class that provides support for the individual who is learning. And also folks in computer classes see the payoff, right? They build their skills and they apply them to their goals. Somebody comes in because they want to take a class and they learn how to do something and now they can do the thing. And a lot of folks are activated by this to amazing new types of learning that they maybe never thought they could even do before. But the computer class model has its limits too, right? Adult learners in computer classes, they can't always receive the individualized support they need on their own schedule. The goals of the adult learner are so central to the learning process. And one thing that I noticed with computer classes is they often attract folks that have the clearest sense of how a computer class and education generally is going to benefit them in either an enrichment capacity or a need that they have. But I see a lot of folks that have very pressing needs that they need something taken care of like today or this week. And what I find about that is that when you're prepared to help that person with their need today, they're a lot more likely to stick with you, come back and receive that support in the future. But they're not super likely to just sign up for the computer class, right? So the computer class is offered, but somebody doesn't necessarily show up for it, even though they have the need. Because they really only show up when they have to do the thing that's the challenge. And that means that they need immediate help for a rare but extremely important digital task, right? One example that I came across a lot in my library work was when the new unemployment website came out in 2020. People needed a ton of support with that. And if there wasn't another person available to help them, they weren't really able to get additional support that they needed. Also, it can be tough to go beyond the basics after a couple of weeks. A lot of folks come in And it turns out that the basics learning, right, understanding keyboard layout, although not typing, which takes longer, understanding how to use a mouse, understanding some basic navigational principles of the internet, they learn it and they wonder what's next. And a lot of times the computer classes that are offered, they don't have a professional development atmosphere where folks can be building new curriculum and new ideas for folks to engage with. And finally, they don't necessarily have access to technologies at home that's going to allow them to practice consistently. And so that means the only practice they're going to get is at something like a public computing center. But that's not how those of us that are those British taxi drivers, right, in our own internet usage, we use it all the time. We're using it 12 hours a day sometimes. And so not having access to the same kind of devices that you need to build proficiency on at home makes a huge difference. So one thing that my work in Philadelphia started to develop early in my relationship with some of the folks that I work with here is we started developing some ideas around the help experience that wasn't directly connected to the computer classes that were being developed. In Philadelphia, the city invested in a program called North Star. North Star is kind of a packaged computer basics courseware. It has a built-in student information system. I like it fine, right? I think it's fine. But, you know, I think that understanding the individual goals of folks coming in for computer classes is a little bit more complex. One thing that we did was in our work with libraries and other nonprofits, we started helping the folks on the ground develop patterns that they could think about when they think about how am I going to serve the folks that are coming in. We developed what we call digital learner personas around commonly articulated needs and the experiences of the learners at the public computing centers. I have one example from the work that we did at the library that came up through our work with a digital resource specialist of smartphone savvy, which is a pattern where a learner is accustomed to the smartphone kind of doing everything they need until they hit that one task that's really hard without a PC. Those folks are, we found at the library, based on the input of the digital resource specialists, they're tough to get to come to classes regularly because they do almost everything they need on their smartphones. And so we worked a little bit. So, okay, how do we take this kind of persona, right? This experience that folks have and develop some learning around that that might engage that person in the kind of long-term practice that they're going to need to develop their skills. We also help develop what we called help journeys around common tasks that need to be accomplished when a learner is starting from the basics. Anybody that's worked in computer basics can tell you that if you don't know how to get somebody into their email in 10 minutes, it can take a very long time. And so we would develop workflows for folks working at the library and other organizations that would kind of give them a map of how much time is any kind of basic task going to take to address. Because in a lot of environments, if you can't meet some of those immediate needs and get people securely connected to a couple of the basics of computing in a one-on-one way, it's going to be really hard for them to take ownership of that learning later when they have to explore for themselves. So I wanted to go through a few reflections that I've had on enrolling helpers in adult digital literacy learning based on my experiences in Philadelphia and just thinking about how amazing it has been over the past few years that we've had this silver lining where we found so many different ways to find lots of people who are interested in helping people through the challenges that they have using digital technology. The first thing that I like to do is reframe some really important questions about enrolling helpers. So the big question that I always ask now when I'm working with any individual organization is, who is available to help and how are they trained? What kind of support do they have? I ask, what is the proximity of the helper to the person who needs help? And I ask, how much trust do people have in the helpers that are available to them? So if we start with who is available to help, how are they trained? I always say that this is something that I actually talk about in a different context with information credibility, but I also like it here. Start with the who, not the what, right? There are so many curricula, resources, videos, and other information out there, but without actual contact, we're entrusting people to essentially solve problems alone, often using the same skills that they're seeking help to strengthen, which means that just focusing on the curriculum that you're using doesn't really speak to the negotiation and the learning that needs to happen in a really two-way fashion, right, for folks to get the help that they need using computers. Second, what is the proximity of the helper to the person who needs the help? This is a literal and figurative proximity, right? Proximity refers to both where help happens, like, is it close? When I work with the libraries, it's hard for people that don't work in the library environment to understand how different individual libraries are just based on neighborhoods, because a lot of folks that need support, their front line of support is the local library. It's the one they can walk to. And then there's the social context in which it happens too. What kind of figurative proximity do we have? Do we share knowledge of each other, or is it a more one-sided help relationship? There are a lot of sort of navigator models that I've seen in other library systems that they tend to be somewhat, they're more temporary, they're often grant funded, and they often draw from folks that haven't really gotten to know the community very well before they go into the library. Those folks can be super effective given the time that they need. But what often happens is the grant runs out, the person leaves, and we're back to wondering who's available to help. And then finally, how much trust do people have in the helpers available to them? Skills develop in time, and so does trust. Trust is the basis for an ongoing help relationship. So in any work that requires a task that requires deliberative practice, the idea of one and done, you're going to come in and take my class and that'll be good, that's rarely going to work on its own. But if you do have those positive experiences and develop community with the learners, those folks are going to see you as a resource. You may bring in a wider network when folks bring other folks to the table, right? Oh, you know, who needs this? My aunt is always asking me about this, or my niece never learned how to do this. I'm going to bring them along too. So one reflection that I have that I think is simple but kind of profound is that there are helpers everywhere. And we often, in the digital literacy learning environment, don't think it kind of counts if you bring extra help in. You know, the idea that, well, you should build into your plan that folks should bring family members with them, or friends, or there should be other folks from the neighborhood that just kind of hang out. Those are often really effective help environments. Another reflection, the funders need to fund helpers. A lot of funding goes towards short-term programming that makes kind of a big splash for about a year. And then there's no continuing funding for folks to keep showing up every single day. The Digital Navigator program is a promising model in Philly. The Digital Resource Specialist program at the Free Library has been really interesting because it embeds this help in libraries within the class of full-time workers, which makes a huge difference. Another reflection, institutions can help build helper positions that are not temporary and reactive and fragile. The people who represent a community's proximity and trust may also need their own ongoing training, and they also need a lot of trust from the institutions to know how to help people. This is a split that I see a little bit in my work between the IT perception of what the use of a digital helper is, which is often to help the IT workload, right? There's a lot of folks that could use a little bit of training in certain systems so they don't have to send a help ticket to IT. But the question is whether that mindset is compatible with the mindset that this is largely a just-in-time work helping people with very specific community needs that are often highly specialized, right? In the case of the digital navigators who have to know how to not navigate a customer service call with Comcast and make sure people aren't getting charged for their internet. And there are subtle distinctions between instructors who have broader generalized knowledge that they can teach, and navigators who have some experience in specialized tasks, and then volunteers who are going to run the gamut of folks that are just really eager to help out in any way they can. And all of that help counts, and it can all be kind of marshaled towards the broader goal of getting folks what they need. And finally, helpers are not superheroes. Not everybody can be a technological expert and provide the kind of help to somebody that they need to help apply to a job, to develop their basic sense of computing comfort. And so the question becomes, what helpers really should know the knowledge, right? Who should have a absolute bird's eye matrix level view of as much digital information as you can possibly imagine? And what is the equivalent of a GPS for digital literacy that is good enough for this task and not appropriate for this other task, right? And how do we connect the different folks with different types of knowledge together so that they can knowledge share and create the environment in which help can happen more effectively? And finally, there's systemic problems in how we access and navigate the internet. So we need to continue focusing on the kinds of infrastructures, including accessible technology and websites that need to be built or expanded to meet the needs of this work. One thing that's been really great from my perspective in Philadelphia is just from the corner of K-12 education, everybody just gets a Chromebook now. Nobody really thinks too much about it. When I was working as an alternative high school teacher in Philadelphia, kids that were issued laptops by schools were often penalized for losing or breaking their laptops. They were charged hundreds of dollars with the threat of their diploma being withheld if they broke that technology. And there has been a mindset shift in the need to get folks devices they need as freely as possible and with as few strings attached as possible. So I am somewhat optimistic that some of the systemic problems that have been really huge in the past 10 years have post-pandemic started to thaw a little bit. And we're starting to realize you need to give folks free and accessible internet. You need to give them devices. And if those devices break, there need to be new devices. And so until everyone has access to that technology in a way that helps develop that fluency, it's really challenging to do all this work only from a public computing center. All right, so now we're gonna all reflect a little bit on how we help. That was a lot of information, but I think I got it in 30 minutes. So in our breakout activity, one thing I'd like us to do is think a little bit about the kinds of values that we want our helpers to bring to the table. And the question that I have is, when was a time when you in your own life received some help with something like a digital task? What was your experience like, your help experience? This could be something as simple as, well, this thing wasn't working and I had to call IT, or, I always struggled with computers, but I was able to figure something out with the help of, this program or this person. Then I want you to reflect on a time that you provided help to someone else, right? So you received help, you provided help. Was the way that you helped similar or different to what you experienced when you needed help yourself, right? This is getting us in the mindset of centering help as the kind of key word in providing digital literacy support. And then with your group, I want you to create 3 to 5 key value statements that you associate with helpful and successful support in digital learning. And you can share them at the link below. I'm going to put that up for you. So if you go to menti.com on a computer, you can use the code 58537348. You can also just hit that QR code with your phone to enter it. And what I want is in your groups, think about some value statements around what kind of help is successful help, what kind of values leads to a successful help experience. So one example is patience to let this learner do it on their own. Those should be statements only because I find that when we do individual words like patience, there's a lot of questions about, well, what kind of patience? Patience to do what? So try to make these some key value statements, right? What are the values that you associate with giving or receiving successful help with digital learning? If there are any questions about that, you can go ahead and put those in the chat. But otherwise, I think we can break into our breakout groups, and then we'll just have a big discussion about it in about 15, 20 minutes.
Okay, I think I'm going to ask for a thumbs up. Give me a thumbs up if you understand what we're going to be talking about in this small group discussion. When did you receive help with a digital task? Reflect on a time when you provided help to someone. Work with your team to create 3 value statements that you associate with this work. Post it up on the Menti, and make statements, not just phrases. Okay, Dave, I'm going to put people in breakout rooms. Listen, here's the rules. When you get into your breakout rooms, make sure you introduce yourself. Make sure everybody has a chance to talk. So somebody keep the group, invite the Shire folks to contribute so somebody can support that. If you're in a room all by yourself, would you come back to the main room and I'll reassign you, right? These groups are going to be a little bit small, 4 or 5 participants in the room. Have a great conversation, meet a great new somebody, and we're talking about helping and being helped. Rooms are open.
Yep.
Have a great conversation. Okay, they're going into rooms. Dave, you can also go into a room and listen if you want, or you
Great.
can also float around from room to
Yeah.
room, or you can just wait. I'm going to go. Looks like we have very nice 4 rooms of 4, and almost everybody has broken out. So I'll see you back. We're going to do this for about 15 minutes, and then they'll do some synthesis, and then you'll have the last word. Okay. And then
Great.
I'll promote the next program.
Sounds
All right,
good.
see you in a bit.
Thank you.
Okay, it's happening. The wisdom is populating on the mentee, right? Sound. I can't hear you.
Yeah, I knew this conversation was going to activate a lot of
Feels.
strong experiences and feels. Yeah.
It's a beautiful sequence. It's a beautiful sequence. And I like how it's going to be, it's going to connect their lived experience to this framework that you've provided with, has to do with trust. So you front ended us to think about the important things.
I hope so.
And now they're going to connect it to their lived experience. Yes.
Well, you're sharing the back end of my my presentation to the
deep
YouTube
strategy is so crystal clear.
I learned it from the best.
All right, they're coming back. They're coming back. As you know, this is my favorite part of a Zoom meeting. When you all come back, give me a thumbs up if you had an interesting conversation. Yo, double thumbs from Barbara. Woohoo! That is high praise indeed, my friend. All right, before we let David do his thing, we want to hear from you. So why don't we open the floor and we pass the talking stick. Some insight came up in your small group meeting that was useful and important to you. Before we even look at the mentees, who wants to share? Just wiggle a finger and I'll know to call on you. Kathy.
Well, one of the points I thought was really cool that was nicely made is I don't see her in the screen. Was that her husband is an IT expert, and so when she gets help from him, he's like, just go ahead, click here, because he has so much on the knowledge, right? So she's learned when working with students. Oh, there you are, Amanda. Amanda said that when she's, she tries to take that experience and refine that when she's helping, like instead of just say click, like if you need to leave the meeting, go into the lower right hand corner and find the red button that says leave, instead of there's, click leave and you're out. So I thought that was a really good point. And I try to do that as well, but it's a skill I'm still working on.
Thank you for sharing. What's another interesting idea that came up in your discussion that you want to call special attention to?
You should say Ariel.
Ariel, we're calling on you.
I don't know what they want me to say, Renee.
You were taking notes.
Oh, I was just taking notes for that. We had a very good conversation, and we raised some final thoughts. I'll share those final thoughts. One of the important things is to raise people up. Don't make them feel stupid. Be kind to people. Not knowing is not wrong. People are coming from a place of weakness when they're coming for help. In our group, it was very interesting. We had both school librarians in middle school and high school. We had film and media educator that works in academia with master's class. We also had another English teacher in I believe it was Kazakhstan. If I'm mistaken, I apologize, but it was definitely not in the United States. So it was good to have a different perspective and sad to hear about some of the experiences that we've all had. But I think one of the key takes away is that we all try to empower learners through practice. One of them was shared by Prisat, who talked about using self-learning through watching videos or reading stuff online through YouTube. So coming prepared to sessions. And Roxanne shared telling the students, I've done this many times, so even if you feel overwhelmed, other students have succeeded in doing that.
Nice.
So that was important.
That's huge. Thank you so much for sharing, Ariel. You gave us a great summary. Dave, how about if we look at the Menti and see what the wisdom of the ages revealed?
Let's do it. If I had to make some predictions, I would predict we're going to see a lot of stuff about feelings that we've had in our help experiences. And we're not going to necessarily see as much about the specific technical knowledge, but let's see. Okay. So elbow to elbow support means that the helper and the person being helped are more like co-learners and co-constructors of a journey of discovery. Love it. Do not make assumptions about what people may know or not know. Questioning, including background knowledge and listening to efficiently target learners' needs and goals. Raise people up and empower them. Be kind to people that you're helping. Not knowing is not wrong. I think we heard some of that in our discussion. Helpful digital learning support incorporates offering suggestions for furthering the quest of the learners beyond one's own capacity, sticking with the effort to completion and being humble. Yeah, humility and shame came up a lot in the conversation that I was a part of. And I think that you really can't overestimate the amount of digital literacy support that really does activate a lot of anxieties from both sides, right? The person providing help is necessarily going to feel like they're not an expert because they're probably not, because every time you think you're a digital expert, all the technology changes, right? And the person coming for help, by definition, is in a vulnerable place. And helpers need to practice empathy and patience for those experiencing a knowledge deficit, for folks that are coming in looking for support. Absolutely. I love all of these. If you still have thoughts that you're having, you can get them all out on the Menti. You have the code, I believe. If you're still in the Menti on your device, you can go ahead and just keep putting statements up there. What I hope came out of these discussions is a centering of the question about digital literacy and things like computer classes, computer basics, on the individual needs that adults bring to the table that we really need to be receptive to, in both actually helping them meet the goals that they had. Another thing that I noticed in our breakout session was sometimes you have a complicated technical goal and it's actually very hard. And I think a lot of digital literacy support kind of assumes that people just need to learn the basics and then they'll be able to do this stuff. But none of us have had that experience. And we're all here with our computer basics right now, and we all have help experiences that are really challenging. And I always say, if you're having a little bit of trouble with your school's online form, now imagine that you don't have a computer at home. You have to do it. So that's really a great thing to keep in mind. So I'm going to come back to my final slide here. I really love these. And when I send out the slides for this, I will incorporate all the things that you've wrote in the Menti here. So if you have anything else that you want to share in terms of values that came up that you didn't have a chance to write down, you can still share those up to even after the presentation, and I'd be happy to share those back out with you in my slides. Now I'm going to switch back over here. Great. So we have 5 minutes left. You've heard what I think. I'm still interested in what folks here are thinking about as they think about their own work with adult digital literacy learners, or in whatever context you're in. I wonder if we could just have a couple of quick reflections on some takeaways from what you've talked about and thought about today.
Yeah, there's a really interesting thread in the chat, Dave, about how, for those of us who are working in the context of teaching and learning, how does this work in a one-to-many experience in a classroom? And Deb, I wonder about your thoughts about how do the concepts of helper and person being helped, how do those translate into the context of a classroom environment where one teacher is working with many students?
I guess I'm limit, like, I think that, first maybe poll the class using like a Menti to see where a predominant amount of needs are. Maybe you could group those people together and go around separate, by different needs. I don't know. And then, what I mean? They can talk and kind of figure things out. And as you go around to these people with different needs, that might be a way to handle that?
That's a great suggestion. One thing that I've done is I use my first assignment of the semester to identify needs.
Yeah.
Right. Because I make it challenging enough that if you can't get onto Medium, you don't know how to make a blog post. It's like, okay, then. So my second assignment is always a collaboration assignment. And I always pair a more skilled person with a less skilled person. Because then basically I've used the first assignment to figure out who's who. And then the second assignment, they don't know any of that, right?
Right.
They don't know that that's what I was doing, but it does create a nice synergy between helper and person being helped. And actually, sometimes there's like a ton of creative benefits that way too.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how you would do that though, like in an adult, when it's like in a library, when it's like a one-off, because oftentimes they just come to the one thing.
That's
like, no, they're not going to sign up for this whole series, which is always difficult, you know?
In my experience with libraries, there's two things that can help. One is that you have a relationship with somebody who works at the library. And I can tell you from working with libraries, you cannot always predict who that person is. Sometimes it is the security guard, right? You don't always know who the helper is, right? The other one is have them bring who some people may not have somebody close that they would trust to bring with them in their life, but a lot of people do. And so I see a lot of intergenerational work. Aunt brings the niece who's applying for a job for the first time, and the niece is on her smartphone all the time. She doesn't know how to do this. So the aunt brings her to the library. You need to go to the library, and we're going to work together now. Helpers can come from anywhere. Yeah.
That is so beautiful. Helpers can come from anywhere, and we're helping each other at the Media Education Lab through this collaborative learning process. So I want to give Dave Cooper Moore a big round of applause. David, wow, you really invited us to think in new ways about the concepts of trust and proximity in relation to how we help and how we are helped. Now, I want to share my screen with you if I can, because I want to kind of give you a heads up. Oh, so many things are happening at the Media Education Lab, and I want you to keep joining us. Now, like Dave said, we'll put the slides and resources and the really cool conversation that happened in the thread, we'll put that in this program, in the program notes for this session today. But please try to join us next week, February 14th, where we're continuing the Across the Generations series with media literacy. We're talking about mid-career folks, and I'm specifically talking about law enforcement officers. 30 to 50-year-olds who got their dose of media literacy for the first time. What happened? What happened, and how did they encounter it? What did they struggle with? Where were their big ahas? And then on February 20th, we have a special ticketed event called Lessons from the Media Education Lab. This event has a fee, but we're talking about 4 of the most popular resource materials the Media Education Lab offers. The free resources: Deconstructing Disney, Media Literacy in Action, Internet Indispensable or Evil, and Critically Analyzing Teen TV. So join us for that. And then you can see other events going into February and March as well. So thanks for being part of our learning community. I'm Renee Hobbs. This is the Media Education Lab. Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Renee, where on where will I find the slides, or will David send those directly? How will
Yes. What we'll do is we'll put them on this page. I'm going to just put the link in the chat right here. We'll put them on the Rethinking the Basics page, which is right there. I put it in the chat for you.
I see it.
Renee, I have a question. Sorry for taking your time. Just so I'm wondering whether